Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a topic that is a huge part of building a portfolio, and that is equity. Equity is the fuel that allows investors to go from their first property to their second and build from there. But most people don't really understand how to use it properly, or they end up making a lot of mistakes along the way, and it really sets them back. So, to help me unpack this topic, I'm chatting with Erin Williams from Broadstreet Finance. Now, before we get into it, I do want to give a bit of a quick backstory about how Erin and I actually met. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and then when we started chatting, we're just asking each other questions like, okay, where are you buying? Where are your clients buying? And then Erin had mentioned, I've got a client, she's currently looking in Melbourne at the moment. And then I said, I've got a client looking in Melbourne as well. And then Erin said, this happened when they put down an offer. And I'm like, that happened to my client as well. And then we realized we were talking about the same client.
Yeah.
And we realized it was actually just a very, very small world. And ever since then, I've been following Erin's content. And then I thought it would be a really good idea to have Erin on today to talk about this topic. So today, Erin is going to share her expertise from the finance side about how equity really works, how to access it, and what mistakes to be careful of. And wherever possible, I'm going to try and chime in and talk about the property side. I'm also just going to talk about how myself and my clients have been able to use equity to build our portfolios. And as always, just a quick note before we get started, this conversation is for educational purposes only, and it's all just generic information. Please make sure you speak to a licensed professional to get advice that is specific to your situation, because this is not financial advice. All right. So let's get into it. Erin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Before we get into it, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into mortgage broking?
Totally. So I left school and didn't know what I wanted to do, and I fell into mortgage broking. So
Okay.
I fell into finance, really. So my cousin is actually a mortgage broker and needed some help in the office. So I started to help him out and interact with clients and just get to know the process. And then from there, I've had a 20-year career in finance. So
20 years.
Yes. I had 12 years at NAB. In various roles.
Yeah.
And always in the third party or mortgage broking side of things. So never in a branch or anything like that, always working with brokers, teaching them about credit and compliance, how to package up deals.
So like behind the scenes at NAB or?
Yeah, behind the scenes, I used to have a portfolio of mortgage brokers, of around 300 mortgage brokers.
Were you a BDM?
Yes, I was a BDM.
Oh, okay. So you were. All right.
Yes, in a couple of different BDM roles.
Yeah.
And then I went over to the aggregation side where I was teaching brokers how to build businesses, how to implement compliance structures, workflows, client experiences. And then I started Broadstreet Finance about 18 months ago.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I guess with all your experience in finance, can you tell me what is equity and why does it matter?
Why does it matter?
Yeah.
So equity essentially is how much your property is worth minus the home loan that is attached to that property. That's the easiest way to explain it. And I'll give you an example of that. Say your property is worth $1 million and you have a mortgage of $500,000 on it. Essentially, you have equity of $500,000 on that property.
Yep.
Now, the difference between equity and usable equity is also needs to be explained. So generally the banks will let you borrow up to 80% of the value of that property. So in that same example, say you have $500,000, you can use 80% of that $1 million. So you can go up to $800,000 and pull that equity out.
Yeah, because you can't take out the full 500,000.
Correct. They're not going to let you borrow all the way up to 100%. That's too risky for the banks.
Yep.
Where you're low risk if you're sitting at that 80% mark.
So if I've got a property that's worth 1 million, but my mortgage is only 500, how do I get to that stage to get that 500K in equity?
Yep. How do you get there?
Yep.
Well, you have to buy a property.
Yeah.
And then it's all about timing as well. So I think time in the market also helps, and purchasing in those right areas as well.
Yep.
A lot of my clients have owned their own home for quite some time, the home that they live in. So most of them do have a bit of equity in that property, but really you just got to get in.
Yep. So for the listeners, it's basically you're buying a property, you're holding onto it, and say you bought it for $500,000 or whatever, or 600, and your loan is 500. Over time, the value of that property grows to eventually be worth 1 million, but the value of the debt stays the same or comes down over time, and that's how you're able to build the equity.
That's right.
Yep.
So we always like to see that mortgage is coming down, especially if it's the home that you're living in.
Yep.
But yes, essentially, it's that value growing.
How do you access the equity?
You talk to me. So essentially the first thing that you have to do is engage someone like a mortgage broker to get a valuation on your property. So the first thing I'll do when talking to a client who wants to access equity is I will go through and I will order a valuation on their property with multiple lenders, not just one lender. Something that I think people don't realize is that different lenders will come back and give you different values for your property. And I've seen that be big differences, small differences. It really just depends. So I'll run a valuation and we'll figure out where we have the most equity with which lender.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because a big part of the equity is understanding the value, and different banks are going to value your property differently. Now, we just use the example of 1 million. One bank might say the property is worth 1 million, but then another bank might say it's worth 1.1. And therefore you've got to assess, do you go with this one here or that one there that's going to give you more money? But at the same time, there might be another bank that says, oh, because of your financial situation, even though your property's worth 1 million or 1.1, we're only going to let you borrow up to 900. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And every bank has different policies as well. So even though that valuation might come in higher, there could be some sort of restriction or policy there that I have to mitigate to go, actually, no, we do need to go with the bank with the lower valuation because of this reason, because we can actually get more out. I just had an example of that. I had a client who has property in a high density area, and the valuation actually came in lower with the bank that we went with. But that's because they would let him go up to a higher loan to value ratio. So bank A would only go up to 70%, bank B would go up to 80%. So we actually use that bank with the lower valuation.
Yeah, and that's why I think if we bring it back to the idea of accessing your equity, I do think it's important to speak to a mortgage broker just to make sure that you are getting a big picture of multiple banks and who's going to give you the most money, which bank is most suited to your financial situation or credit situation, rather than just thinking that it's one bank only. And if that bank says no, that's it, I can't do anything.
Yep, absolutely. And some banks are more open to certain borrowers as well, or certain postcodes even. We have postcodes restrictions too. So as a part of that research and servicing, you're not just looking at how much equity you can get out. You're also looking at where either your existing property is, where you're pulling that equity from, but then also where you're potentially purchasing as well. And they may not always be the same bank. That could be two banks.
True. Okay, so accessing equity. First step is to get a valuation.
Definitely, get a valuation.
What's next?
And then what we do is we see what your long-term strategy is, and we'll look at, okay, what do we need to do today to help support that strategy? So an example is we're refinancing that $500,000 loan. We'll keep with that example. And then we're going to create a separate split and say we will put that on interest only, and that will actually become tax deductible because we're using those funds to purchase an investment.
Assuming the equity is being used for an investment.
Assuming that. So assuming that $500,000 mortgage is your own home, and then that new $300,000 is for investment purposes. So that split will now become tax deductible.
So you've got an existing home loan, and this is the $500K loan on your property that you live in, and you're paying it down, and then you're basically going to the bank, getting a valuation, getting a top up, and then it's like, okay, here's $300K extra, and they put that in a separate.
We put that in a separate loan account. So we create a new loan account. And that, because it's being used for investment purposes, would become tax deductible.
They give you an offset account, right?
You can get an offset account.
You can get an offset account. But basically, like, they're giving you a loan, but they give you the cash.
They do.
Right?
They actually give you the cash. So you can just leave it in that loan account, or you can put it in the offset account that's attached to that loan.
Got it.
So generally what we do is, because a lot of people won't have a property yet that they want to purchase. They're still just kind of thinking about it. They know they want to get in, and they know kind of the budget that they're looking at, but they might not have a property yet. So they'll say to me, Erin, I don't want to pull that equity out yet because I don't want to make a repayment on it if I'm not using the cash.
That's right.
But what we generally do, and this is depending on the circumstances, but generally what we'll do is we'll create that separate split where that cash is going to go, and we'll leave it sitting in there or in the offset account attached to it. It will be on interest only, so you won't make any repayments on it. You won't be charged any interest until you actually pull that money and you find that property and you put that money down.
Yep.
That's when you start making repayments.
Yep. So it's a separate loan account, possibly an offset account.
Yep.
Cash is there, ready to go.
Ready.
Yep. Anything else when it comes to accessing equity?
Yeah, so I guess when accessing equity, what the kind of timing of that is when we're talking about getting into the investment game is we got that cash there ready to go. What I usually like to do is once that's formally approved is then we apply for the pre-approval for the purchase as well. So then we're ready with the pre-approval for the new loan, and then we've also got the cash sitting
So just before we get to that, you still have to apply for a loan to get the equity. They don't just give you the 500.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It's in your property.
It is. Yeah. It is technically yours, right? Yeah. But they still want to look at the 3 C's of credit. Now, what the 3 C's of credit are your capacity to pay that loan off. So you're still liable, even if you're not drawing on that money straight away, you can, and you're still liable to pay that back. So they want to look at that you have capacity to pay it back. So your income, what your circumstances are. They want to look at the collateral, which is the security. So that valuation we're talking about, that's the collateral. And then also your character too. So they want to make sure that you have good financial behaviors. We don't have any defaults or late credit card payments or a heap of credit inquiries. They're still going to look at those 3 things when you're accessing that equity.
But someone might argue, but it's my house and you know, I've got 500K owing on the house and the house is worth 1 million. It's my house. Just give me the money.
Totally. Wouldn't that be nice? For the bank, no, that is not how it works. You still have to sign a loan contract and the minimum repayments for a certain amount of term as well. But no, that would be lovely.
And just breaking it down for the listeners, like if you do have a property that has 500K owing and it's worth 1 million, and then you want to access the equity, well, you still need to be in a financial position to apply for that loan and get it approved. So basically, if you've lost your job and you're not getting any income, then you can't access the equity.
That's right. And some people, I think, struggle with that when they think, oh, I can access all of that equity. It's like, well, yes, the equity is sitting there, but you still have to be able to repay that. And we don't want to put anyone into financial hardship as well.
So you still have to apply for a loan and prove to the bank that you're good for it.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. So you apply for the loan, for the equity. Anything else?
I don't think so. I think that's kind of what explains it.
So it's basically a loan application. Once that's done, you've got the equity sitting there.
Yep.
Okay. I guess what I want to ask you about is what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when they are, I guess, accessing their equity or using it to buy whatever?
Yeah. So I guess some common mistakes that I see or come across, really it comes down to making sure what you're doing today will affect your long-term strategy. So making sure we're thinking about the future. Some people like to think about the now and potentially they might want to go buy a boat by accessing that equity. And that's totally up to you. It's your money. But I think that you need to think about how that's going to support the long-term strategy. So some of the mistakes that I see when purchasing a investment property using their equity is doing things like what they're usually comfortable with. So for example, purchasing a property around the corner because they're an expert in that area. They're not open to other suburbs that potentially will have huge growth. Putting all their eggs in one basket is another one. So a lot of my clients that access equity, they may want to purchase 1 or 2 investment properties. And so I explain to them that, and I don't want to get too convoluted because it might confuse people, but most people traditional thinking is that when we buy an investment property, we have to use 20%. We have to put 20% down. We've got to pay stamp duty, obviously. That's not always the case. When you purchase a property, you can actually go higher than 80% of the value of that property when applying for a loan. So essentially, you could only put 10% down. You could put 12% down. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. And that's why it's important making sure you've got the right people in your corner.
I think when you're using equity to fund your next deposit, like if you only want to buy one property and you've got enough equity for a 20% deposit, beautiful.
Absolutely.
Happy days.
Do it.
But if you've only got enough for a 10% deposit, a lot of people find themselves in that dilemma. Do I wait until I've got more equity for a 20% deposit, or do I just go now and use whatever equity I have to get in again? And I think for me, I'm a big fan of just getting in when you can, because by the time you wait until you've got 20% down, the market's already moved and you've already missed out on the market.
Correct.
So my wife and I were in a similar position before having our first child where we had a lot of equity. We could have bought maybe one property with a 20% deposit or split that up and buy two properties. And we just decided, you know what, we're going to buy two. Okay, we're going to split the equity into two and buy two properties. One we bought for, I think, 480, another one we bought for 360, and then that's it. Okay. Had we only bought one property, our portfolio won't be anywhere near what it is today. So being able to buy those two properties with lower deposits and have to pay lender's mortgage insurance, no one likes to pay lender's mortgage insurance. But for us, it was a necessary evil to get into the market and get two really good investment properties, because if we were to buy those properties today, forget it. We wouldn't be able to afford them.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes like another mistake that I see is people overthinking when they're purchasing a property as well.
Yeah.
And overthinking that property. Of course, you don't want to buy a lemon. I completely understand that. But doing things like another common mistake that I see is people not getting a pest and building inspection, or even knowing that they have to get a pest and building inspection is wild to me.
That is a common mistake that a lot of people make when they're buying an investment property. They don't even know what a building and pest inspection is. They believe you just go and inspect the property and that's it. But they don't know what's going on behind the walls, underneath the floors and around the property. So yeah, definitely got to get those things done. What about specific to pulling out equity and using equity? Are there any common mistakes there that you've seen?
Look, some of the mistakes that I've seen is cross-collateralization of properties, which is something that since I've started the business I have not done, and something I always try to avoid because it can be very messy. But essentially what cross-collateralization is when you have, say, two securities, for example, secured by one loan. So you've got one loan contract, and that can be really limiting when you're trying to pull equity
in
out.
this scenario, it would be someone who owns their own property, like, you know, their family home in Sydney.
Yep.
And then they're pulling out equity to buy an investment property.
Totally.
And then they're cross-securitizing their home in Sydney against the new investment property.
Investment property, yep.
How does that work?
Yeah, it works exactly as that. So you have one loan contract, you apply for one loan. It is messy and it's very hard to untie that situation as well.
Why is it messy?
Because if you're wanting to later on make any changes to either of those securities, so say, for example, you want to pull equity out on this one or you default on this one as well, it also affects this home too.
Yep.
So essentially, if you go into financial hardship, which we never want to see, but that does happen, if you go into financial hardship, the bank can essentially come for both of those properties, especially if one decreases in value.
Yep.
It can get a little scary.
Yeah.
So we always try and keep them very separate. They can be with the same bank. Absolutely. That's not cross-collateralizing when they're with the same bank.
Yep.
It's when you've got one loan contract, one loan and two properties.
Yeah. For me, the way I always understood it, and this is why I don't cross-collateralize any of my properties, is that if you secure your home against an investment property, if anything happens with that investment property or your home and you can't pay it or financial hardship, the bank can come and basically say, we're going to sell off both homes.
Correct.
To get our money back.
Correct.
Whereas if it was only secured against one, then the bank can only come for one of those properties to get their money back.
That's right.
And that's why it's just such a messy situation if you have to go down that road.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just not a fan of it in general.
Me either.
And even I think if you want to refinance one of those properties,
do both.
It becomes a real mess.
Essentially, you need a new loan contract because the security is changing.
Yeah.
So the circumstances are changing. Your loan to value ratio is changing. The security that secures that loan changes as well. It's just so messy. I, thank goodness, have not done that since I've started the business and I don't intend to.
So if it is such a mess to cross-collateralize, why do people do it?
I don't think it's that common right now. I think that people are becoming a bit more savvy as well. But essentially it would be, say you wanted to have both those securities looked at as one and you wanted to borrow 80% of that total value. So one, your loan to value ratio might be 100% on this property, but it's 20% on this, you can borrow that total amount, if that makes sense. So because that's a security. So your loan to value ratio can be affected. but it's not something that I would recommend at all.
Yeah. Okay. Just back on the topic of accessing equity, there's one mistake that I do want to talk about, and I always call this out to my clients as well when they're taking out equity, and that is being careful with your valuations and not taking out too much equity. Okay. There's a lot of people that will say, oh, if the bank gives me that valuation, yeah, I'm going to take it all. But you've just got to be careful with your valuation sometimes, and also your level of confidence that the valuation holds true in this market today, but in the future as well. So an example, and I experienced this myself, is one of my properties, we bought it for, I think, $410,000. And then when we were going to take out equity, it had gone all the way up to $500,000. We're like, happy days. Yeah. We're going to take out all that equity. I think it was 510, 520. And we're like, yeah, give me all the equity I can get. And we borrowed all the way up to, actually, no, I can't remember. I think we borrowed all the way up to about 450. And then shortly after that, COVID hit, property prices went back a little bit. And then that property value went backwards to 400,000. So then I was in a position where I was over mortgaged. I had a $450,000 debt on a property that was only worth $400,000. And I wanted to sell that property. But then I was like, well, if I sell it, I'll only get $400,000 for it. But then I've got a $450,000 loan. So basically what I had to do is I had to hold on to that property until the market caught up. And eventually I was able to kind of sell the property and break even on it. So this is something that I always tell my clients, and that is, okay, if you're going to pull out that equity, are you confident that that property in that market is going to sell for that amount if you had to sell it next year or the year after? You want to make sure that the market is going to continue to grow. Otherwise, maybe don't pull out all the equity. Just be a bit careful.
I totally agree. And I think your property is only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. Really, a valuation is a valuation. It's a piece of paper. Yes, it means something, but also when you are going to sell it, the banks aren't buying it.
Yep. So just make sure that you're confident in the valuation for the long term.
Yep, absolutely.
Another mistake I do want to talk about is using equity for the right purposes, because essentially you're taking out equity that is debt.
Yes.
So don't go buying stupid things
Please
with it.
don't.
That's why for me personally, when I take out equity, it's only to buy an investment property.
Yep.
Okay. But some people take out equity to go on holidays.
Yeah.
You're blowing 20 grand to go on a holiday, and then you're paying interest on that holiday you just went. Other things are buying cars with equity.
Sometimes you have to do that. Like, I understand why people have to do that. And there's certain rules that I use or try and implement with my clients when they're wanting to, hey, I really need a new family car. We've just had our third child, or our car's breaking down. I understand that. Obviously, car loans and asset loans are more expensive over shorter periods of time, so can cash flow wise be a bit of a struggle. So I do see and help clients with pulling out equity to purchase a car, but I always like to create a separate split for that, give them what the loan repayments would be over, say, a 5-year term or a 7-year term, so they're not paying that car off over 30 years because nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, okay.
So I try and create that separate split because it's almost like a mental game as well. If you see that 30 grand sitting there and you know it's secured by your car, you're going to smash that harder and repay that off quicker because it is, there's good debt and bad debt. And that is a bad debt in my eyes. Yep. So good debt to me is when it's tax deductible and we can use that negative gearing. Now, you can only do that if you're using it for investment purposes. Even if it's secured by your home that you live in, if you're using that equity to purchase an investment property, that now becomes good debt.
Can you tell me again why taking out equity to buy an investment property is a good debt?
Because it's tax deductible.
Because the interest is tax deductible? Yeah.
Correct.
And the other thing I want to add is if you're buying an investment property, provided you buy the right asset in the right area, it grows in value.
Yes.
Okay. So you're taking out debt. The debt stays the same. You buy a $500,000 property. In a few years' time, that $500,000 property goes up to $700,000. So it's gone up in value, but the debt remains the same.
Yes.
And then you're paying interest on it, but the interest is tax deductible. Yes. That's why we call it a good debt.
Yeah.
What's a bad debt?
A bad debt is something that goes down in value.
Like?
And something like a boat, like a jet ski. Those things. A holiday. Yes, a holiday is great, but use your savings for that. You know, a lot of my clients will come to me and want to use their savings to purchase an investment property. That's great if you have $300,000, $150,000 sitting there and you don't plan on going on any holidays or doing renovations. But if you're wanting to do those things, use your savings for that. I'm not an accountant, obviously, but that is the advice I would give myself. Use my savings for my personal fun things that I want to do.
As a credit advisor.
Yeah.
Not a tax advisor.
No, not a tax advisor. And then use your equity and pull out a loan for the good debt, the tax deductible debt.
Let's talk about case studies and client stories. I guess we can talk about some good case studies of when they've used equity for good debt and turned it into a really good outcome for themselves, or even some examples of when they've not done the right thing with it. Don't know if you want to share those or not.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So look, the first case study I will give you is one of my clients came to me last year and they had purchased their own home that they have been living in approximately 8 years ago. So they had a debt of around $300,000, which is awesome.
Yep.
They're a working couple, professional couple. They have 2 children who are a little bit older now as well, and they're ready to up their risk a bit and get into the investing game.
So the property has a debt of $300,000.
Yep.
What's the property worth?
Depending on the bank, but the highest valuation we got was $1.2 million.
Nice.
So they have plenty of equity. They have, like I was talking about before, the 3 C's of credit. They have beautiful character, beautiful credit scores, which we love. They have plenty of capacity now that their kids aren't going to daycare and costing them a fortune in daycare. And they obviously have the collateral behind them. So they have that equity to pull. When we were first going through it, they were nervous about pulling too much equity, which I can completely understand. But their long-term strategy is they want a portfolio of 2 to 3 properties. And same thing, they were very concerned about pulling out equity too early because they did not have a property in mind. They knew they wanted to buy interstate, but they didn't have a property ready to go yet. So what we did, I refinanced them over because unfortunately the home loan that they had was at a very high rate, and their bank that they were with for 8 years and loyal to for 8 years would not negotiate. Very frustrating for them. So refinanced them over, pulled that money out, created that separate split like we've been talking about.
So they had a $300K debt. You refinanced them.
Over.
You pulled equity out. How much equity did you get out?
We pulled, I think it was like 400,000 we
400,000.
pulled out for them. And the banks, for someone like that, they're quite low risk to the bank because they have the great 3 C's. They tick all the boxes.
What are those three C's
so
again?
the collateral, so the property behind them.
Yep.
They have the capacity to repay the loan. So they have the income. Their expenses aren't too high. They're pretty normal. And then they also have the character. So they pay their bills on time. They've always paid their mortgage on time. They don't have huge personal debt. So they just have a small credit card each. No personal loans, nothing like that.
Great.
So what we did is we pulled that equity out, refinanced them over to an amazing rate as well. So saved them some money on that refinance, and also pulled that equity out. And we sat it there on interest only for 5 years. So we sat it there and then we applied for a pre-approval for the new purchase, for the first purchase.
Yep.
A pre-approval is a loan that you're using to actually purchase that property with that last 90 days. So they didn't have a property in mind yet. They kind of knew the budget and the state that they wanted to purchase in. And then we left that pre-approval there, ready to go. The equity's there for them to pull on when they need to. And they bought that first property and they pulled the equity that they needed. I think it was around $180,000 they used for that. And then they had the other equity sitting there. We applied for that second pre-approval and they've just settled on their second property.
Beautiful. Where did they buy?
They bought in Rockhampton and Melton, I think it's called, in Victoria.
Nice.
Yeah. So some good suburbs.
Yep. Good stuff. So this is pretty recent then?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Great. No, that is a classic example, you know, like a couple or a family who own their own home, Sydney, Melbourne, owned it for quite a while, paid it down, or the market's gone up, and then they've just got all this equity, take it out, and then buy an investment property interstate. And sometimes a lot of people can get caught up in the ideas like, oh, I've done so well to pay down my property. Why would I take out more debt?
Yes.
And I always explain to them, it's about actually, you know, you've done really well to get your home and pay that down, but now you're using the wealth you've built in that home to go and secure a high-performing asset. One way they can do that is to actually buy a high-performing asset like property, one or two of those. And if you can secure those and then it grows over time, let's just say you buy a 600K asset and it grows to like 800 or 900K in the next 5 years, across two properties, you can make like a good amount of equity in those properties. Okay. And then you can use the equity in those properties to further build your portfolio.
Correct.
But if you wanted to play it safe, okay, you could just buy two assets, hold it for maybe 10 years. And then in 10 years, when that 600K property is maybe gone to like 1.2 million, sell it, cash in on it, and then possibly use those gains to then take it back and pay off your home.
That you live in.
And I'm a big fan of that strategy to pay off a principal place of residence rather than slogging away doing principal and interest repayments for the next 30 years.
Go and sell that investment property after 5-10 years of having it, rather than having your home, your own home mortgage for 30 years, have it for 15 years and pay it off. Be bad debt free, right? You might still have some good debt, but that's okay because it's tax deductible. It's on an asset that is increasing in value, not going down in value. Yeah.
I think a lot of my followers will know that I've used equity to build my portfolio. So I only used a cash deposit for my first two properties. And then from there on, I've always just used the equity and growth in my properties to fund the next one. So my second property that we bought in Redcliffe, that grew by a really good amount. And then we used that equity to buy the next property in Margate and Regent's Park. Okay. Those were the two that we bought just before we had our first child. My wife was on maternity leave for a year. And then while she's on maternity leave, the market just went crazy. So two properties went up in value and we had about 300K in equity just on the back of those two properties. So we took that out and then we bought properties 4, 5 and 6.
Love that.
Now those ones have gone up in value. And then we've just bought property number 7. Okay, so that is just what we're trying to do. It's about creating more leverage to buy assets that will grow in value so that eventually you can sell off those assets to pay down a big part of your portfolio and be debt free.
Correct, absolutely.
All right, well, just before we wrap up, I do want to ask you, interest rates have been coming down lately after we've spent a really long period in high interest rates. What do you see for the lending landscape across the banks in Australia for the next, 12 to 24 months?
It's interesting, isn't it? It's a great time and finally some financial relief for certain people as well. Look, I think the banks are lowering their fixed rates because they obviously want to lure you into those fixed rates. And generally what happens is when we see fixed rates drop, it's a sign that the RBA is going to drop the interest rate. So there is a prediction that there will be a couple more interest rate drops in the next 12 months.
12 months, okay.
Let's hope so. I think it would be great relief for everyone.
How many do you think will happen in the next 12 months?
Oh, I would love 3.
3 in 12 months?
I think 2.
2 in 12 months and they'll just kind of hold?
I think so. I think it will hold. I think some people would love to see it, COVID rates to come back.
Probably not.
I just don't see it happening. I really don't. I think that we're a bit delusional to think that. But I think 2 or 3 rate drops would be amazing in the next 12 months.
Yeah. I mean, the banks and the RBA did so much to hike rates up in such a short amount of time in the last, was it 2 years or 8 or less?
And it's just put on so much financial pressure for people.
Yeah. I can't see them bringing it down at that rate.
No, I know.
What are you seeing from your clients at the moment now that the rates have started coming down?
People are excited.
Okay.
So my phone is ringing like hotcakes at the moment, which I am so incredibly grateful for. But people who I was talking to, a year ago, they were potentially looking at buying their own home or buying an investment property. They're now going, Erin, now is the time. And my seasoned investors have been saying that for even longer because they could see the writing was on the wall and they've been wanting to get in even earlier. Now, I think when is the right time to buy a property, I think was yesterday, but as soon as possible and as soon as you're ready for it. Everyone's situation is different and just being prepared to, have that hold over you, because it is, a mortgage is a hold.
Yep.
But property, as we're seeing it in most locations, are increasing in Australia. That's just a reality.
In the right locations.
In the right locations.
From an investor perspective. Yeah.
Correct. And right location for you to live in can mean close to a particular school or a catchment that you want to be in, whatever it may be. But investment property, obviously, yes, looking in the right location for growth areas. But I'm speaking to a lot of investors at the moment. They are wanting to get in and go hard.
And that's just on the back of rate. Like, were they holding off while the rates were high, or they've always kind of wanted to get in?
They were. I think seasoned investors always know to ride that wave.
Yep.
Where people who it might be their first time, that rate was really scary when we were initially talking, going, oh, my rate's going to be, 6.5%. That's terrifying to me. Now we're looking at it, we're going, oh, your rate's going to be like 5.9%. It's going to be 6%. That feels a bit more comfortable, and those repayments feel a bit more comfortable. So they're really coming in hard now. And I think it's going to be interesting with what's going to happen with the market even 1st of January. We're going to see some changes in, I know this is a completely different topic, but with the first home buyer scheme, that's obviously going to change. So the income caps will be removed completely as of 1st of January. So you're going to be competing with a lot more people.
Yep.
And even the price caps are increasing too, especially in Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah.
So I think that the property market is going to be increasingly competitive.
I think so too, and I've already started noticing it.
Have you?
Yep. There's a lot more competition in the areas that I've been buying in. And at the same time, with interest rates coming down, I am seeing that slowly more sellers are coming to the market and feeling like it's a good time to sell, because I feel that a lot of them, and this is commentary as well from a lot of the agents I speak to on the ground, is that a lot of homeowners were reluctant to sell. They're just holding off because they didn't think it was a good time in the market to sell. But now interest rates coming down, market's heating up. They're like, yep, I'll sell. Even investors wanting to sell and cash in as well.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, and that's what I would do if I was an investor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. What about from a lending perspective, like within the lenders, are you seeing much policy changes to make it, I guess, easier for people to get borrowing?
Yeah, absolutely. So being a broker, we have access to over 50 lenders. So a lot is always constantly changing. But a few of the recent changes I've seen is some mortgage insurance waivers come in as well.
Really?
So we always kind of had those mortgage insurance waivers for, doctors and lawyers and engineers.
No, they don't need it.
I know, right? And there was always this one particular lender that was really good with like registered nurses and people in medical professionals across the board, which has been fabulous. But we're now seeing more lenders come out with those waivers and coming out for different industries as well, which I think is fabulous. So what that essentially means is you can borrow up to 90% of the value of the property without having to pay mortgage insurance, which you usually pay after 80%.
So who are some of the newer industries that can get access to these
So emergency services, which we love. So we've got paramedics in there. We've got police officers, firefighters, which I think is a fabulous change. But even some weird and wonderful people like actors, DJs. It's interesting.
Not buyers agents and mortgage brokers?
Unfortunately not.
Okay, that's a shame.
But another couple of policy changes. So a lot of banks are trying to make it easier for self-employed people as well. So the traditional way that you would obtain finance and the documents you'd have to provide if you were self-employed is 2 years financial statements. Now, quite a few lenders, if you're paying yourself a wage regularly as a self-employed person, they will just look at you like a pay-as-you-go person. They will just need maybe 6 months of history. Some need 2 years of history. It's all a little bit different.
Okay. And you say that these policy changes are on the back of these interest rate cuts?
I don't
or
know
they've been in the works for a while?
I think they've been in the works for a while, especially with the major banks. They take a long time to do policy changes, which I can completely understand. It's all risk mitigated and I understand that. But they're really trying to, I think, not all banks, but a lot of banks are trying to help people borrow more and get into the market. Another great policy change is HEX debt, which I know has been huge, a big topic of conversation. So certain banks will not take into account your HEX debt that you have as a liability, especially if you're going to pay it off within a year or 2 years or 3 years. It just depends on the bank.
Okay.
But they'll actually exclude that from your liabilities, which helps a lot of people, especially first-time buyers trying to get into the market.
What about the 3% buffer?
Yeah.
That is slapped onto your assessment.
It's so annoying.
Is that still
No, it's still there.
Okay.
It's still there.
Do you think that'll come down?
I don't know. There's always chatter.
Yeah.
But I just can't see it happening. Now, that 3% buffer is for most lending. Some banks now have a 1% buffer if it's just a straight refinance. So say you're refinancing from bank A to bank B, you're not increasing your lending and you haven't had any financial hardship, you can actually get that 1% buffer. So they'll assess you on the 1% rather than the traditional 3%.
Yep.
But no, 3% still around.
Yep.
I don't see it changing.
Anything else before we finish off for today?
No, I think that if you are really thinking about accessing equity or you're purchasing a property, speak to a professional about it, get the balls rolling. Like I said, I've been talking to people a year out, 6 months out, and we're planning for that, thinking about what you can do today to help you if you are wanting to access equity or start the investing game.
Yep.
Making sure you've got the right people in your corner, it's super important.
All right, Erin. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really awesome having you on here to share your perspective. For me, the big takeaway is that equity really is the fuel that helps investors move forward. But at the end of the day, equity is still debt. And you do need to be very careful with how you use it. Otherwise, you could really set yourself back. I've actually really enjoyed this chat because we've been able to talk about how homeowners can take the wealth that they've already built in the property that they own and then actually make it work harder for them by putting it towards assets that will grow.
Yes.
Okay. So for anyone listening, if you're sitting on equity and wondering how you can make it work for you, make sure you speak with a qualified mortgage broker and make sure that it aligns with a clear property plan before you make your next move. And just a reminder for everyone that is listening today, none of this is financial advice. It's all general in nature and for educational purposes. So please make sure you get professional advice before making any decisions. Once again, thank you for tuning in. And once again, thank you, Erin, for coming in and having a chat with me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.